Hello, beautiful people. I'm Dr. Trina Hinkley from The Expanded Self. Hope you're having a great Monday and a happy Monday to you, whatever day it is that you're listening. Just popping on today to have a little bit more of a chat about boundaries. So last week I talked about what boundaries were, how you know if they're healthy or not so healthy, and how we know when they've been violated, which is often our body talking to us. So this week I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we might create boundaries and then support them and nourish them so that we're actually looking after ourselves when we need to. So I'll talk a little bit about that today and Wednesday, and then Friday I'll be back with a little meditation to help support you creating some healthy boundaries in your life. So I wanted to share a little story about when I've needed to create boundaries in the past, and it's a pretty simple story, and I'm sure most of you can identify with it. I was working in a role in an organisation that had a lot of meetings, lots and lots and lots of meetings, and that really didn't work for me. It meant that my energy was really drained all the time because I really needed some time out of the meetings to focus on the work that I needed to do, but also just to have some downtime and not have to talk and interact with people, even though I was working, but just not really interacting with people as much. So I set up some time in my calendar around meeting free time, and I labelled it meeting free time, and spoke with the people that I worked most closely with and asked that they respect that. So I used what's called an I statement, and I'll talk through some of those today and on Wednesday. And basically the way that the I statements go is you express your need and then how that need's going to be implemented, and then you ask for their support in that. So basically what I did was, I would say things like, I can't be in meetings all the time. I really need some time out of meetings so I can get my work done and look after myself and not drain my energy quite as much. I've set up some time in my calendar that's called meeting free time, and I ask you to respect that meeting free time in my calendar and not book meetings in during that time. So it's as simple as that. It's a really simple little statement just expressing your need, what's going to work for you, how you want it to work, and what you're asking from them. So that was one way that I set up some boundaries at work around protecting some time for myself to look after myself so I didn't get too drained. So I wanted to talk today about sort of some of the foundation stuff around creating boundaries for you that you can be aware of that will help you create boundaries. And on Wednesday, I'll talk through some steps about how to use some of what I talk about today to create boundaries. So I've sort of grouped it into two areas. One is things about you and one is things about other people, because there are always going to be other people involved when you need to set boundaries. So if we start about you, the first thing that you really need to do is be really self-aware and know what your needs are and know what your limits are. And these can relate to physical, personal, emotional, spiritual or energetic, sexual, mental or intellectual, or they might be related to things that you own or things that you use. So for instance, your property. And just making sure that you're clear just for yourself on what is and isn't okay for you, what isn't going to work for you. You need to have that clarity, because if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to share it with anybody else. And that leads to the next point, which is that it's actually your responsibility to act. If you feel that your boundaries are being encroached upon, you can't expect the other person to just automatically, all of a sudden, be aware of what your boundaries are and stop encroaching on them or stop violating them. You have a responsibility to share what your boundaries are with the other person, which leads to the next point of how you do it, and do it respectfully. You don't need to stand there and scream at them and blame them. It's about you taking responsibility. And remember the I statement. I need, it's important to me. So think about, and before I share the example, I'll talk about being very clear. So being really, really clear about what your boundaries are is really important, and what they might look like. So in the example that I gave about time in my calendar for meeting free time, I was really clear that this time is meeting free time. Please don't book meetings in this time. So people knew what my boundary was with respect to that. Thinking about another example, you may need time out to look after yourself in your relationship, and one way that a lot of people like to do that is to take a bath or to take a walk or something like that. So if we use the example of the bath, you might have a certain idea of what that looks like in your mind. It might be quiet, peaceful, you might have the candle burning, you might have a glass of champagne or a cup of tea beside you and enjoying that while you're in your bath. You may or may not want to be interrupted. So think about what that looks like for you and then share it really carefully, really clearly and respectfully with your partner or anybody else in the house. And that might look something like this. I need to take time out each week to look after myself so I'm as good in myself as I can be, and so I can give as much to our relationship as possible. And one way that I need to do that is to have at least one bath every week. When I'm in the bath, what I really like is for it to be quiet and peaceful. I don't mind if you come in. I'm happy to chat to you for a few moments or to share a little story just briefly. But most of the time, I'm going to want to be quiet and peaceful and just relaxing into the bath. I might close the door if it's cold, or if there's music or television going that I want to deaden the sound to a little bit so that I can really relax in the peace. So that was a bit longer example of how you might share some detail so that the person that you're sharing it with can really see what's important to you and what you need in that situation. So be very clear about what you need. Also doing that helps alleviate any anxiety that the other person might experience. So if you think about your partner coming to you and saying, I need time out, I need space from you, that could be quite scary and quite confronting. And if you do that to your partner, they may have a similar reaction. So share with them gently and respectfully what it is you really need and why you need it and how it's going to help. Make sure that you protect and preserve your boundaries. So if you've put a boundary in place and somebody isn't respecting it, you might need to reinforce that boundary. You might need to share information on it again. You might need to do something physical. You might need to relocate where you are in your workspace or in your home environment. There may be other ways that you need to protect and preserve that boundary. A couple of ways that are really important for protecting your boundaries is saying no and asking for what you need. Now in Western culture, we're not very good at saying no. A lot of us tend to be people pleasers, and I talked a little bit about this in last week's blogs. So just practicing saying no and different ways of saying no. And this could be, so one example that I've used many times over the years is a work situation where somebody says, oh, I'd really like you to do this thing for me. Your immediate inclination might be, oh yes, okay, but really it may not be the best thing for you. So just taking a little bit of time to think about that could be really useful and beneficial. And one way that you can do that can be to say, that's a great idea. I'd really love to help. Let me just take a day or two to check in with my calendar and my other obligations, and I'll come back to you. Now that buys you a little bit of time just to ride that initial wave of enthusiasm, because some things can be particularly interesting and enticing. And it gives you time to think about whether or not you can actually commit to what you're being asked to do. Boundaries sometimes need to be flexible, so just keep that in mind when you're setting your boundaries. Some of them we might want to change, we might want to modify them for certain people or in certain contexts. So be careful not to make them too rigid and flexible so that they can't be changed, because you might actually need to do it. Also, having boundaries that are really, really rigid means that you distance yourself from other people, and it's more difficult to connect with other people, and that's probably not ideal. You might need to have some practices in place to support your boundaries. So think about things like, a lot of people like to journal and like privacy in what they journal. And if you live with other people, you might need to think about ways that you can protect that privacy. That might be having some sort of a lock on your journal or using an electronic journal that's protected by password. And this is a really big one. As much as possible, avoid dual relationships. So I spoke about those last week, and this is where we cross primary relationship boundaries. So think of teacher-student, doctor-patient, employer-employee, where we have generally clearer boundaries around, or certain boundaries around, what may or may not be acceptable in those relationships. If we start to be friends with those people as well, that can muddy the waters of the relationships and make it a lot less clear of what is and isn't acceptable and okay in those relationships. So just think about that, perhaps before you launch into a dual relationship. And if you're a leader, I really strongly encourage you to keep healthy boundaries between your professional and personal lives. There's some really strong evidence that this is a great way for you to role model for people in your organisation, particularly people in your team, and that it supports you and them to have healthier lives within and outside of work. So that's sort of the about you bit, the things that you can do for yourself. And then there are things around other people as well. So I'll just talk to those, and there's only a few points here, so I won't ramble on as long here. So be really prepared to hear and respect other people's boundaries, because you can't expect them to respect yours if you're not respecting theirs. So be aware of what other people's boundaries might be. If they haven't voiced anything to you or communicated anything to you in any other way, then think about how you would like to be treated. It's the old do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And treat them with at least that much respect. But be aware that they may have boundaries in places that you don't. So sometimes people will act in a way that suggests that they're uncomfortable, but not actually be able to communicate that. So their body language, for instance, they might look away when they're talking to you. They might try to change the subject on a certain topic. They might just find it very difficult to communicate on something. And if that's the case, it's okay for you to ask them if they're feeling comfortable or if something needs to change for them to be comfortable. So make sure that you respect whatever they share with you. So that's also about watching cues from other people. And then reinforce other people's behaviours. If you share a boundary with somebody and they respect that, then make sure you acknowledge that. And just a simple act of, I see that you're being really careful to respect what I asked you to respect. And I'm really grateful for that. Thank you for your consideration. Just that simple, a few simple words strung together. So they're just a few things that you can consider when you're thinking about creating boundaries that I wanted to share with you today. So I hope that they're useful in helping you thinking. I do have a Cultivate Healthy Boundaries workshop now scheduled for the 1st of August. So please check in on my website. I'll pop the link in the comments with or the blurb with this post and have a look. I've already had a fair bit of interest in it, which is wonderful. So do pop on over, and if you're interested, make sure that you book in early to avoid disappointment. Early bird discount until, I think it's the 18th of July, but it's on the website, and also available via live stream if you'd rather attend in that kind of capacity, or if you prefer, or if you're interstate and not in Melbourne. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for listening. And feel free to message me if you'd like more information or would like to connect in some way. Bye.